Developed in the late 1930s, the Brewster F2a Buffalo was the first monoplane fighter to see service with the United States Navy. Despite being considerably more advanced than the biplane fighters it was designed to replace, it soon became apparent that the Buffalo was somewhat outclassed by other aircraft of the time. Despite its shortcomings, it did have a number of successes during the Second World War. Join me in this video as I build and review the 1/72nd scale F2a Buffalo from Hobby Boss. Hi, I'm Matt and you're watching Model Minutes. Before I get started, a massive thank you to my patrons. I really appreciate the support you guys are giving me. If you'd like to find out more about pledging support and what it gets you, check out the links under the video. I built this model due to popular request from an earlier eBay haul video I made. If you were around for that one, you'll remember that I got this kit as part of an awesome deal, and many of you requested to see it built in the comments, so here it is. Before I get started with the build, please remember that adult supervision may be required due to the use of sharp tools and toxic paints and chemicals. Hobby Boss recommends this kit to those aged 14 years and older. As is typical with the kits from Hobby Boss, the front of the box features an image of the finished kit with a photographic background. The sides of the box feature further images and some multilingual information about the real aircraft. Inside the box you'll find a glossy A5 instruction booklet, which is printed in colour on the front and back, but black and white inside. The exploded diagrams are well drawn and easy to follow. The rear features full colour painting instructions for two different versions. The one on the left is that of a US Navy Buffalo of VF3. The right-hand one is a test paint scheme the United States experimented with. I initially thought it was a bit of a prank, but have been told that it is a genuine attempt by the US to improve the camouflage of their aircraft. It is worth noting that although this would be an interesting paint finish, no decals are included for this scheme, which would mean painting the entire pattern, which could be quite complicated. The sprues all come in separate plastic bags, some with additional foam wrapped around them to help protect the details and fragile parts. Two sprues hold the majority of components and are moulded in grey plastic, along with the fuselage and wings which come separately. A third sprue is moulded in clear plastic and contains the cockpit canopy. The details are well moulded with recessed panel lines being present throughout, and it is noticeable that there is a distinct lack of any flash. The decals look to be well printed and there are a reasonable number of them in the kit. It remains to be seen how well they can be applied later in the build. Removing all the parts from the bags, I begin construction by assembling the cockpit interior. The components were removed from their sprues and then cleaned up with a nail file if needed. Many of these parts seem to just click into place, but I will be using Tamiya extra thin cement to bond them permanently together. Not a great deal of detail is present in the cockpit, which is a shame, especially as no pilot figure is included to hide that fact. I thinned Humbrol 81 pale yellow matte acrylic with some Tamiya acrylic thinners, and then painted the entire cockpit area. I'm using this paint as I did a little research and it seemed to be an appropriate colour. Thinning it will help avoid leaving brushstrokes. With the paint now dry, the top of the fuselage was cemented to the wing component. The good thing about using Tamiya extra thin cement is that it can flow into gaps quite well to ensure a good bond. I then added the tail control surfaces to the model, again by removing with a knife, cleaning with a file and cementing in place. Just take a little care here to ensure that they don't droop downwards as the cement cures. It is at this stage that I am now ready to start painting. I thinned Humbrol 11 silver acrylic with Tamiya acrylic thinners and then proceeded to brush it over the model. A number of thin coats will be needed to get a good even finish. I know there are better metallic paints out there, but I was curious to see how good a finish it might be possible to achieve with basic paints, particularly if you were a beginner and this is all you might have access to at the time. I repeated the process of thinning my paint, but this time it was Humbrol 24 Trainer Yellow Matte Acrylic, and a number of thin layers were added to the top surfaces of the wings. The next paint I used was Humbrol 34 matte white acrylic, again thinned to improve its flow quality. This was applied to the rudder and the top half of the engine, which was still on the sprue. You might be able to notice that I've painted the parts that I have yet to add to the model whilst they are still on the sprue with a coat of Humbrol 11 silver. The propeller components were removed from their sprues, cleaned up, and then the spinner added to the prop. When this was dry, the prop was inserted into the engine component and the retaining part cemented in place. If you are careful, the propeller can be made to turn freely, but the tolerances for this are really fine, and any paint or cement can prevent this from happening. The engine was then cemented onto the nose of the aircraft. A little paint had to be sanded away to ensure a good bond between the plastic and cement. The tail wheel is removed from the sprue and cemented into its slot at the bottom of the aircraft. I then move on to cutting the landing gear legs from the sprue as well. You might be able to notice that I've painted the tyres on the wheels with Humbrol 33 matte black. It's worth noting that Hobby Boss have not made any provision to depict the landing gear raised. This will require some cutting of the landing gear legs to make this a viable option. I add the wheels to their respective positions on the legs, and then cement the legs into their slots in the bottom of the wings. The support for the aerial is then carefully removed and added to the model. This is quite a delicate part and care must be taken here. The same goes for the magnifying gun sight, which is also added to the model. I've painted this part in Humbrol 53 gunmetal grey. With the majority of construction complete, I thin Humbrol 135 satin varnish and then apply it over the entire model. This will become the base layer for the decals and help prevent any silvering from occurring, which is likely to occur over a matte finish. With the varnish now dry, I begin to cut the decal sheet into more manageable sections and soak the decals in warm water. This releases them from the backing paper, allowing them to be slid into position. I'm using Humbrol Decal Fix to help soften the decals into the surface of the model, applying it to the correct locations before adding the decals, then a further layer over the top when they are in place. I found that the decals were easy to position, but they did tend to be a little thin and prone to being damaged during placement. Care must be taken with these decals to avoid tearing them. With all the decals now in position, and having been left overnight to cure, a coat of Humbrol 135 satin varnish was applied to protect them. I'm using the enamel version, which I've pre-thinned with white spirit in the pot. This enamel layer will help protect all the previous acrylic layers. When the varnish was dry, Citadel non-oil acrylic black wash was painted over the details. This will help bring them out and apply an element of weathering. Tamiya acrylic thinners were then applied to a cotton bud and used to brush the excess wash away. Had I not used an enamel varnish earlier, all the previous acrylic layers would also be removed at this stage. Brushing in the direction of airflow over the aircraft, you can get quite good and realistic stains. The cockpit canopy was then brush painted using Humbrol 11 silver straight out of the pot. I'm using a fine brush and carefully following the moulded frame details. At this point I'm touching up some of the details I'd missed with Humbrol 53 gunmetal grey, these being parts of the gun sight, pitot tube and machine gun barrels in the wings. Here I'm using Humbrol matte acrylic enamel varnish number 49 to paint the engine cowling, wings and rudder of the aircraft, generally any areas that are not silver. This is to create a bit of a contrast between the bare metal finish and the painted surfaces. When that final coat of paint was dry, the last step was to add the cockpit canopy in place. I'm using a general purpose glue here to help avoid causing the clear part to fog up, which poly cement has a habit of doing. The part was pushed into place and left to cure. And that's as far as I went with my build of the Hobby Boss F2a Buffalo in 1/72 scale. I decided to leave this model in a fairly pristine finish, as if it had yet to see any action in the war. Further detailing I might consider would be to add radio wires and more details in the cockpit. You could also add a diorama base depicting the deck of an aircraft carrier for added interest. This kit dates from 2013, where it was newly tooled and can be found for about £10 in the UK at various online stores. I think this is a fair price for this kit, but feel very lucky to have paid considerably less for my version. If you'd like to know how much I actually spent, head over to my eBay haul video to find out. This kit would be great for you if you're a beginner, as it is very easy to build, features good detail and has a low part count. The paint scheme is also not too difficult to reproduce and would help get some practice in. It is let down a little by the decals as they were somewhat fiddly and fragile to apply. Also, the lack of cockpit detail, pilot, or option to display the model with the landing gear raised is disappointing. That being said, I feel quite proud of the results I've achieved with my build of the Hobby Boss F2a Buffalo. As always, let me know what you think of my build, techniques and finished model in the comments below. Feel free to leave a suggestion for other kits or videos you'd like to see too. Don't forget to check out the links under the video to discover how to connect with me on social media amongst other things. All that's left to say is thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again on the workbench next time.